So welcome. It is a stunningly beautiful day here in Baltimore, and I hope the weather where you are is similarly beautiful. If nothing else, it is Friday, so happy Friday. I just want to say that we wish you all well, and if you are interested, we are having Alumni Weekend in person, March 25th, 26th, and 27th. So just something to think about if you're interested in coming to Baltimore, or if you're already in Baltimore and looking for a fun weekend. So I'm Jamie Seward, Associate Director of Lifelong Learning with the Office of Alumni Relations here at Johns Hopkins University. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsor, the Arts, Entertainment, Media, and Entrepreneurship Affinity. Now, before I begin our program, I want to encourage you to continue and also ask questions in the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I see that some of you may have put them in the chat. I would encourage you to put them in the Q&A. We don't want to lose them in the chat that streams. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Elena Stokes. Elena is the founder of Wonderkin PR. Wonderkin PR works with publishers and authors to formulate the best press materials and to implement the most effective publicity strategies. Elena is also a very active member of our Alumni Council, which is why she's here today. We really appreciate her. And she's a 1996 graduate of the School of Arts and Sciences. She also has her MA from NYU, very impressive. So it is my pleasure to turn this program over to Elena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. It's a pleasure to work with you. I love working with your team over at Hopkins. And I am so excited for today because I'm learning so much already. I was already sneaked onto the phone call earlier and started asking John all sorts of questions. But my name is Elena. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Happy Friday. And I know you're all here really to hear from John. So I'm going to go over his bio with you so you know a little bit about him. And then we're going to ask him a bunch of questions. So John is an author, an entrepreneur, and podcaster. He executive produces and hosts the podcast series Moving Forward, which reaches listeners in over 50 countries. And in Moving Forward, John has spoken with today's most prominent entrepreneurs, and we are lucky to have him here today to share his knowledge and experience on everything from starting a business on Poshmark to writing a book. John earned his BA from the University of Pennsylvania, his JD from Georgetown, and his MBA from Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. He is a TEDx speaker and has been a regular keynote speaker, lecturer, and panelist for Carey Business School. And he's also a guest contributor for Carry the Torch. So you can see he's really not busy at all. And John, we're so happy to have you with us today. And I think we want to start with a kind of introductory question, which would be, tell us what is Poshmark, and tell us the story of how it ended up becoming this business solution for your dad's business during COVID when no one was going to stores anymore.
Yeah.
What did you do to change it all around?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Jamie and Elena, so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to share our story. So first thing, I'm going to preface this by saying I have no experience with clothes in terms of selling, barely with buying, as a consumer. But my dad has been in the industry for a long time. He's worked as a designer, and he's had 2 stores, and he specializes specifically in formal wear. And as you mentioned, Elena, it was really the pandemic. It was the start of 2020 in the state of Maryland. There was a non-essential business closure order. So that really impacted his business. Prior to this, as early as 2016, my dad noticed a huge shift in consumer behavior. We all have become accustomed to ordering things on Amazon or other retailers online. And he started to notice that shift around the mid to 2010s, where people would browse his shop, try something on, but then go buy it online elsewhere. So as early as 2016, we started looking at, well, rather than fight the 800-pound gorilla, is there a way we can incorporate e-commerce into your business? And it's not as easy as it sounds. On paper, it's the most obvious solution, but we tried every major e-commerce platform from 2016, and Amazon, eBay, Shopify, they all had their pros and cons, but none of them really gelled with his business. Specifically a small mom and pop shop. And it was purely by accident. I discovered Poshmark in 2018. I was pulling my hair out over some HTML coding issue on a site that we had for, selling his clothes.
Yeah.
And I found an article on Poshmark and I didn't know what it was. And I read it and it just sounded like it's just a mobile app. You basically do everything on your phone.
Yep.
And I said to myself, well, we don't have anything to lose, because the other thing that's a big factor with a business is that with a lot of platforms, you've got to pay standing fees, subscription fees, if you want to be a professional seller,
Yes.
say on Amazon, whether you sell anything or not. And that can really impact the business's, costs and bottom line. So I downloaded the app and we put up a couple of listings. And I will tell you, in the beginning, it was crickets. We
Right.
didn't really move anything. It wasn't until I started understanding that Poshmark is a completely different language.
Mhm.
And that was really what changed things for us and really got us the traction, was understanding what is Poshmark all about. And it's been around for a while. It's actually just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. It started out as a reseller app for
Mhm.
individuals like you, Elena. If you have extra clothes in your closet that you're not wearing anymore, it was a solution that Manesh Chandra, the CEO, came up with, 10 years ago.
Right.
An easy way for you to sell those clothes, because what you're not wearing anymore, someone else may want.
And you can sell, John, completely new clothes as well. Like you could
Exactly.
go shop something and then, it sells a tag on it, or it can be a vintage situation,
Absolutely.
right? So you really have both.
Yeah, Poshmark, I think, primarily started out, and its majority user base in the early days was people selling secondhand. I think in 2018, we started to see more people buying new clothes, whether it's individuals. Maybe you bought something, it still has the tags on it, you never wore it, it's still
Right.
technically new. Or you bought something on a Black Friday sale and you want to retail arbitrage it, meaning you got it for a great price, you can sell it for higher on an app like Poshmark. We thought about using it because we specialize in selling new clothes, not only new clothes, but clothes that are bought factory direct or bought from a wholesaler. So it was an experiment for us. Can we use an app like this to develop an e-commerce channel? And it really took learning the language of Poshmark. Poshmark is a very vibrant community, over 60 million users, buyers and sellers. And one of the things that we had to kind of break away from was this idea that e-commerce is simply a place where you list your wares and just leave it alone, and then the sales
It's a
rain in.
community, right?
It's
You
a
really
community.
you want to
And
interact.
there's a lot of engagement in
Yeah.
that community. People share out other people's listings. Sellers will share out other people's listings. Now, if you're a traditional business, that goes very counter to the playbook of I'm competing with the shop
Right.
down the
That's
street.
interesting.
I'm not going to promote them, advertise them. But on Poshmark, you're talking about a nationwide marketplace. You're talking about a seller maybe in California who's sharing out your items to their 10,000, 20,000 followers. Once we understood that and started supporting our fellow Poshers, that's when we started to see real traction. That's when we started to close sales. So it was really kind of learning that language and learning how to be part of that community and to engage. That was the hurdle that we had to get over. The platform is great. I'll say that. First of all, if you just want something that's user-friendly to list, to take photos, to put copy.
What do you say to people, John, that say like, oh, I'm the worst photo taker and I need a photographer, and like, no, you can just hop on your phone.
I will tell you what, I am by no means a professional photographer. I will say two things to that. Number one, choose a space. It can be the corner of your house, make it look a little bit nice. Have good lighting. I think the key to good product photos is decent lighting. And when it comes to clothes, this is something that I think will really make you stand out as a seller. Is clothes are three-dimensional. They have curves, they have folds, and just putting something on a hanger is not going to show off the full curvature of it. So I recommend either use a model. It could be yourself, it could be a friend, or invest a few dollars into a mannequin so that you can really show off that form. And that's one of the things that we do, is that we use mannequins and we dress them up. We have a little corner and we have decent lighting. but I just use my phone. This is the only thing I use. I don't use a professional camera. And we've been able to take great photos just from doing this. In fact, I'll open up one of the listings and just to show you what you can do on an iPhone or an Android, basically just take multiple angles of a product and be very descriptive with your copy, to the point where you're providing the details on the brand, the manufacturer, the dimensions and measurements. And what's great is that Poshmark has now added video. That was a recent thing that they added last year. You can now have video, which gives you a much more immersive experience.
Yeah.
You can really get that three-dimensional view. That's something that I really think that Poshmark did that made it leaps ahead of other e-commerce platforms, was the integration of video. So you don't have to be a great photographer. Good lighting and a form to really show off the features and take multiple angles. Poshmark gives you up to 16 photos. We don't even use all 16. And we've been able to just use a smartphone to take our photos for our listings.
And so for new items, so for those of us that are listening, I know a lot of us have things in our closets that we want to sell. But for those who might have a small clothing store or jewelry or pet, I know they're branched out to pet items or, home goods, house, home items. How might we expand that small business like you did for your father's business? Is there a certain day that you line everything up and you take the pictures, and what's the best way for when you have all new, material that you want to share?
It's a great question. I think one of the biggest, and this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to explore this and to create content tailored to a small business. Whether you're a busy professional and you're doing this in your spare time, or whether you're a small business, time management is probably your biggest hurdle and challenge. So I recommend set aside a block of time. And for us, it started out an hour a week just to get up 1 or 2 listings and just to test it out. Once we started getting traction and closing sales, then we realized, this is actually driving revenue. We're going to devote more time to it. So I recommend, as with anything else, test the waters first, whatever spare time you have. And this goes with any endeavor, whether it's writing a book or starting a business, devote whatever spare time you have. For many people, Poshmark is a side hustle. It's a side business. It's not their main thing. And it can become that. And there are people who have turned it into their main profession, but start simple. Use whatever spare minutes you have. It takes you all of 2 minutes to get a listing up. And in fact, I'll give you a great case study. A friend of mine from business school, who I think might be on today's webinar, her name is Izzy. She texted me in August and said, my sister-in-law and I were thinking of starting an online boutique. Can you give us any pointers?
Right.
Within a day, they had their Poshmark store up, they had it fully branded, and they had their first listings. They closed their first 3 sales within a week and a half. And that was in August. By the end of the year, they had not only reached over 12,000 followers, they had achieved what's called Poshmark ambassador status, which is kind of like you hit certain benchmarks and your account is upgraded. And they hit the 4-figure mark. And so just by starting out, and this is something they're doing in their spare time, and what I was able to do, and I was so glad to do this, was to share them the mistakes I made in the beginning, not engaging early on and not really diving into the language and learning the language. They were able to really, get that traction early on. So it start out just with the spare minutes that you have.
I think that's really important. I know I have a friend who was really struggling during COVID. She got laid off and she loves beautiful clothing. She went around to thrift stores and she bought it and started selling it on Poshmark. And she started making thousands of dollars per month. So she was making about 3,000 or 4,000 a month, and she was able to pay for her kids' school. This is like a real, people that are struggling were able to convert it and just get on the app and make, a real change in their lives too, which is amazing. For
our business, for my dad's business, Elena, it was the only lifeline we really had in 2020. Just trying to keep the business going. We couldn't have in-person traffic like we used to. We couldn't have appointments. Poshmark really became the lifeline to continue that business going while we were, at the same time looking at other ways to pivot to this new reality. So absolutely. And there are countless stories of people who were laid off or who needed to supplement their incomes. And a platform like this has been able to do that. And it's amazing to see.
Well, I know that everybody is writing down furious little notes and tips. So, John, you've been writing the book about this, right?
Yes.
With all these different tips. So, where are you in the process, and why do you think this is so important to tell this story?
Okay, great question. First of all, in terms of where am I with writing this book, I've been writing this book. It's funny. I like to say I was writing this starting in 2019 after we'd been on Poshmark for a couple of months. I have a podcast. And the first thing that I started doing was I did a whole series, about 20 episodes, documenting everything we were doing on Poshmark. And I was writing blogs with that. I consider that my first draft. I didn't conceive it as a book at the time. I was just sharing it out. Those episodes ended up becoming the most listened to episodes. And to this day, they continue to generate a lot of traffic. It was around late 2019, but into the pandemic in 2020 that I thought, you know what? I think a book out of the content that I've already created might be helpful. And really, one of the catalysts was not only the experience of helping my dad's business stay afloat, but seeing how many businesses were going under. There was a time in 2020 where if you opened up the business headlines, you would see major retailers filing for bankruptcy. The one thing that those headlines missed were the number of small businesses that were going under. Small businesses usually don't file for bankruptcy. They just close their doors. I was listening to an NPR story around that time, and they were interviewing a small shopkeeper, a dress shop. And the owner was just talking about how she couldn't keep the lights on. And pivoting to online, it might be easy for a big box store to spend millions of dollars to develop their e-commerce website. For small businesses, a lot more challenging. And so it was the right time to do it. And they're just starting to get the stats now. In 2020, over 100,000 small businesses closed. That's not bankruptcy. That's just closing their doors. So at that time, that's when it occurred to me, this is the time for a book that not only talks about how to engage and learn this language, but specifically for a small business, because it's a different language. It's a different type of application. Poshmark is a lot of bargaining. There's a lot of negotiation. It's still seen in large circles as a reseller app, but it can also be a great e-commerce pipeline for a small business with a few changes, with a few shifts. And I think it has complemented the business really well.
I think that's amazing. And in a way, these stories it's not just a story about, okay, here's how to do, right? How to do Poshmark, right? Here's my secrets. But it's really kind of also gives people a story of hope, because as you said, you're just one of the businesses, your father's was just one of those businesses that was struggling during the time. And This was this important lifeline. And as I mentioned, that friend, there's so many people that have side hustles. You have your main job and you have 4 or 5 side hustles, and all of a sudden that can actually rise to the forefront as a major revenue, source. So
not only that, with so many of us being at home over the last 2 years, we've come to realize how much stuff we have in our closets that we're not using anymore. And we should acknowledge there's been a big movement. You have figures like Marie Kondo talking about, reducing clutter, reducing the stuff that you don't use. And it goes back to that old adage, the stuff I'm not using anymore, someone's discarded item might be someone else's treasure. And that's absolutely true. And Poshmark was built on that whole ethos of resell, reuse, recycle. And it's got such a robust community now of buyers and sellers. So I think it just makes perfect sense for someone like your friend or an individual who has maybe a closet full of clothes that they're not wearing anymore to look into that.
I want to tell you something. My dogs might bark in a second because I see somebody coming into my driveway. I put them all the way over there. But if you hear barking, just please forgive me. And
Poshmark is expanding into pet goods, as we talked about earlier.
Yes, tell us a little bit about that expansion, about the different.
Well, first of all, recently, Poshmark again has grown by leaps and bounds. We were talking about 60 million users in 2020. And I think that's grown significantly since then. You have major brands that have now gotten on the Poshmark bandwagon. We're, you know, I think we
Mhm.
started a little bit early as a small business. I've started to see more small businesses get on Poshmark, but now you're seeing major brands utilizing Poshmark, and they've expanded categories. There, you know, you can now sell home goods, artwork, dishware, things like
Books.
that.
I'm in publishing.
Books.
Are they selling books yet? Because I know
I've seen people selling books. I don't know if it's an official category, but I've seen people selling books. But they've also expanded into things like pet goods, and most recently electronics. That is a whole new category that has recently opened up. And Poshmark has also expanded its market. It's now not just in the US, but they've expanded to Canada, Australia, and most recently in India. So the company is starting to have a global footprint.
So I know you're going to share some of all these tips in the book, but what else, what kind of other research did you draw on, you know, to put the book together?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. Obviously, just understanding the business of what my dad does. I got that firsthand, just working with him, just trying to find an e-commerce solution. I got to understand his business that much better. But what was really an unexpected gift as I was writing this book was connecting with individuals within the Poshmark organization, including Manesh Chandra, who I just want to give a shout out to, because I reached out to him to let him know what we were doing with Poshmark. And he took a real interest in it, a sincere interest. And when I let him know that I was writing this book, he connected me with individuals within the organization. Throughout 2020 and into 2021, I got to have several calls like this one, Zoom calls with different members of the organization to let them know what we were doing. And in fact, I was invited to be a featured speaker at PoshFest 2020, their annual meeting, which was an incredible experience. So just by doing what we're doing and by documenting this, I've been able to connect with amazing people who are working for the company, who are passionate about their mission, and to learn so much more, and to really get firsthand just what the mission is and why they're doing this, and you know, how Poshmark, and I've been able to give them feedback on how Poshmark can be better served for a business community, because I think that's a huge untapped market. That is really where potential growth is in the B2B market, or the
I
B2B.
agree. Yeah. I think for me, when I was learning more about Poshmark, I had heard about it, but when I knew that we would get to chat about it, I was reading up on it, and I originally had thought, oh, this is a great place to get some beautiful vintage clothes and things like that. But it's so much more, and it's a real competitor to those other big like retailers, eBay, Amazon, things like that.
Absolutely.
So when you were starting to write this book, how, with the bio that I read with the podcasting and the blogging and your job and all that, how did you find the time to start writing your book? And do you have any tips for us aspiring writers here that are listening today?
Absolutely.
About how to get started on that?
Well, first of all, I always recommend, as with anything, before you go full in, and this applies to Poshmark, but this also applies to writing a book, dip the toe in the water. I started out by documenting this as a podcast with a series of blogs. The fact that I was able to generate 20 blogs and podcasts worth meant I had 20 chapters of a book.
Right.
And I always recommend to new writers, start with a short form. It can be a blog, it can be an article, you can self-publish it, you can pitch it to a magazine, and see if that's something that really not only has a market of readers and interest, but it's something that you can draw on and expand on. And I realized there was so much material after I did that series. Poshmark was continually updating its platform. And even just as recently as this week, I've been sharing on the podcast the newest features that Poshmark has added. So I recommend start small. And I like to say, short form is really the way to go. You have 20 blogs or 20 pieces, you've got 20 chapters. And really compiling that first draft was a matter of just putting that together into a different format and then filling in the gaps. But in terms of starting out, if you're a busy person, as with anything else, use whatever pockets of time you have. You know, I think a big mistake with writing is to see it as a separate thing that needs to have a huge block of time. The whole idea of of locking yourself in a hotel for 2 weeks to write the great American novel. That's not the way book writing works for most people. Most people don't have that luxury. Most people are writing books maybe as a side thing where they want to document something they're working on. Find those pockets of time. It can be minutes. I actually on the podcast interviewed a great writing coach a couple of years ago, and she suggested a technique, which I think is great for a busy person. It's what I like to call the 3-15-90 method. And she broke it down this way: write 3 times a week for 15 minutes.
Yep.
And over 90 days, you'll have enough content for a book. And I credit, her name is Monica Miller. It's one of the podcast interviews that I have. Great tip right there. One of my favorite authors, John Grisham, and this comes from my lawyer days. I mean, he writes legal thrillers. I listened to an NPR article. He started writing his first novel when he was practicing as a trial lawyer.
Right.
The way he did it was he would sit outside the courtroom 4 minutes, 3 minutes with a notepad and write. Maybe he could only write a paragraph, but it was additive over time. Writing should be seen as an additive thing that you can do a little bit at a time. You don't have to separate a huge block and stare at a blank page. It's something that you can do incrementally and work on.
And that's a good point, because I know as a Hopkins grad, I studied under Stephen Dixon, and he would always say, all you need to do is write that 1 page a day, and the next day I edit it, and then I'll write the next page. And if you do that every day, then you have 365, pages, you're ready to go, you have a book. So I think you said that you can, just like you can fit Poshmark into your life, you can fit writing into your life, but you just, like you say, dip your toe. And not only that, but I've been working in publishing since 1997. And, the publishers really want to see a multifaceted platform.
Yeah.
So if you're just coming in with your book and you don't have that social media behind you, that hurts you, because they need to see, can John engage with his readers? What kind of audiences he already have out there? So I think in another way, by you doing the book, following that particular book process, podcasting, blogging beforehand, you get a book out of it, but it also helps you actually secure a publisher, an agent, and all of that, because they need to see that audience is there.
Well, Elena, you also hit on something really important. Everyone has a different learning style, and having different ways of communicating content, I think, is important to cater to a multifaceted audience. Some people are audio learners. Some people like to learn in short bites, and some people like to read everything in a book. So you're engaging different types of learners who can benefit from this. And that's the thing. You don't have to wait till my book is done and out. I have the content on my website, on a podcast. In fact, I was just this week, the last 3 weeks, I've been sharing the latest updates on Poshmark. So you can get all of that information right now. It's available in a very succinct format.
Right. Well, I know that that's going to be, a lot of people here are going to be buying that, including myself. So when we're talking about writing the book, do you have anything that's your kryptonite? You just really, it really kills your ability to write that day? Or is it just something that you struggled when you were writing the book that it was difficult to get over?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say I'll speak specifically to this book. I think striking the right balance between putting in practical steps, but not just turning it into a manual. I'm not just writing a manual, and I'm not just writing, steps like an engineering instructional manual. I want to write a book that also has some larger principles behind it, because one of the challenges is that with a platform like Poshmark, it's continually evolving. So then there's that question, how much do I continue to update because there's this new thing that's out? So you got to strike that balance.
Right.
And one of the things I try to do is also have really principles that will make you a success regardless of what new bell or whistle has been added to it. Because there are principles you can draw from your own experience or from writing this. It's not just about how do I do the mechanics of listing and sharing. There are certain principles that are going to be tried and true no matter what bell or whistle is added to the platform. So I think that's really a little bit of a challenge with a book like this, is striking that balance.
And I think people, honestly, when you were saying that you've interviewed a lot of what do you call them? Poshers? I think people love to hear those stories too, just like how, and it's like you can give all this really interesting factual information that will help somebody, but then you're also hearing those stories. So I think That's the best way to do
Well,
it.
I think story is a big component. And that's one of the things
Absolutely.
I try to put in the book is not just illustrate here are the steps. Here's the context. Here's the story
Right.
behind it. Here's why we got, I mean, the book starts out with why we got onto Poshmark in the first place. And in
Right.
fact, it even starts there before that by me talking about my very little experience with selling clothes. I mean, the basic line, the bottom line is if I can do this,
Anyone can.
almost anyone can.
That's amazing. And when you're writing, do you have any authors that that inspire you, or in particular that you think about when you're writing? Any favorite authors that you would recommend to us?
I mean, a book that I think everyone should read. Stephen King wrote a great book called On Writing. It's actually, I think, one of the best resources out there for anyone who wants to write a book. It's very story driven. So it's not like how do you structure a book or how do you do A, B, and C. He really shares a lot of his stories, and through that you draw out the lessons that he imparts onto you on such as ideation or writing that first draft. It's about as close as you can get to actually having him in the room. So that's a book that I really enjoy. I love reading a wide range of books. One of my passions is investing. I'm a big fan of Peter Lynch. He's written some great books, and I love his style because it really is, he talks about general principles, but then he also shows, practical strategies. So I love books that actually mix the two, but I also love great novels. So, I think if you expand your repertoire of what you read, you will learn so much and you'll gain so much. And then you'll be able to really develop your own style by, I think Stephen King actually once said, you can't be a writer if you're not a reader. And I really believe that's true.
And when I was looking on your LinkedIn profile, I saw that you have some Star Trek credits behind
That's
your
right.
name. So you can tell us, that's just so much fun. Tell us a little bit about that, because everybody just obviously loves that. And plus, do you read any science fiction fantasy? Because,
I was an I call it my quarter life crisis. I was actually a television and film actor for a couple of years, and I've had some theatrical training, and I've done, a couple of projects both here in the Maryland area, but also when I was living in Los Angeles. And I was a co-star in a web series. It was independently produced by not only ambitious fans, but it had the involvement of people who worked on the actual Star Trek movies.
I love that.
And it for its time, this was 2004 to 2006. And this was, we're talking about before the dawn of Netflix streaming, which is so prolific now. This was fans creating content, and Star Trek was kind of in a lull period. So this was kind of filling in the gaps. And I got to work with some amazing people, including George Takei, who guest starred in one of the episodes. We actually played the same character at different ages.
I love that.
And in fact, that's actually a book I will be working on in the future, is telling that story. But I have already told part of that story in a 2017 article for crack.com. And again, it was telling it in short form. And from there, testing the waters and seeing, is there enough interest and excitement and material here to turn it into a long form? And I've talked about it on the podcast as well. So as with anything else, it starts with experimenting with that short form.
That's really interesting. And actually that was funny, because I was going to say, like, oh, what do we, what's next for you? So is that book next, or do you have
yes,
some other
absolutely.
ideas?
Right now, my focus is on really finishing up that manuscript. I'm exploring traditional publishing, and that's my goal with the Poshmark book. But I'm going to get this book out there, whether it's traditionally published or self-published. And then, yes, that's on the horizon, is telling my story. It's more than just Star Trek, but just that period in my life of pursuing acting. And that time, being exposed to that industry and developing the skill sets have contributed to so many things that I do today. From the time that I was in business school, at Carey Business School, being able to give a presentation or give a speech, a lot of that was drawing upon skills that I developed while as an actor. So that's a story that I'm also excited to tell in a book one day as well.
Yeah. And I know, again, for anyone, a lot of people here are listening today also, not only for the Poshmark success that you have, but it's a writing success. And when you're looking for your agent, I know I always recommend look for that comp book, that comparison book that you felt was inspiring. You know, in your case, it would be telling these stories of hope at the same time giving some really important factual information. How can you succeed? So when you were doing that, and when you do you have any tips to share in terms of?
Yeah, absolutely. I would
that?
say do your research. There are books out there. There are databases. If you're trying to go the traditional publishing route,
Right.
Look at the agent data. Every agent, it's like looking for a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Understand what niche your book is, whether it's a novel, whether if it's fiction as opposed to nonfiction, and even within nonfiction or fiction, you're going to have different categories.
Yeah.
You want to find an agent who is the right fit for that book. And really what's interesting, having gone through that process is the proposal. You basically have to put a business proposal for your book. That's in some ways.
So do you think your MBA helped you out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can find sample proposals out there, but part of writing a book isn't just the act of writing a book. It's also understanding how to market the book, who the audience is for that book. And a lot of that, you really have to have some understanding of why you're writing this book, who it's for. And that's another thing that I think I would say, if you're going to write a book, make sure you understand who the audience is, as specific as possible. And that's key, I think, to not only writing a book, staying on track with it, finishing it, but also finding an agent who might be a good fit for that. And, or if you're going to self-publish, finding the right editor. I think those are keys to being, to getting your book out there.
And when you find that right agent and things like that, do you have opinions on, best next up, just work with the agent and just, do you write your whole book before you go to that agent, or are you writing a piece of the book? That's
a great question. The process is going to be a little bit, and I recommend, depending on the type of book you're writing, make sure you research what the agent is looking for. Typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elena, I know you're in the industry. For fiction, you're going to want to have your basic manuscript done as you're pitching to a fiction agent. For nonfiction, it's more important that you have the proposal, the basic structure, and maybe a really good sample chapter or two. And that's one of the things that I learned actually going through that process, was that agents, depending on the genre or the type of book, they're going to be looking for different things.
Totally different.
So, and another piece of advice I have is that I've been able to connect with amazing people in the literary community on Twitter. Twitter is probably one of the most robust places to be on. And there's a whole community under #writing community where agents and agencies and publishers and publicists, there's a whole community of people that you can connect with. And the more you interact with people, including your fellow writers, the more you're going to be able to get a better understanding of how this whole process works.
That is great advice. That's great advice. I think, and that's what I said to you before, I'm really impressed by the steps you've taken to, already build your audience, because as you said, the proposal is really a marketing proposal too. Who's going to read this book? How are you going to help get the word out? And I think in terms for fiction, I think it is often true that you have to write almost a whole book. But again, if you have an amazing platform and you have 1 million, Twitter followers, and you're turning in your fiction proposal, you might not have to be a complete total proposal, because you have 1 million, and so.
Absolutely. Having a platform,
work with you on that.
I think you hit on a key word. Having a platform is key.
Yeah.
And you know what? I will say, drawing it back to Poshmark, one of the benefits of Poshmark is that it has such a robust community. But if you have a platform outside of that, if you've got a social media presence outside of that, that's going to increase your ROI. If you connect your Poshmark presence with your social media presence, you're expanding your potential customer base right there. There are Poshmark users who have tremendous success just because they've spent the time and energy building up their following on Instagram or Pinterest. In fact, Poshmark, I think, just recently had a deal with Snapchat. So there's an integration between Snapchat and Poshmark. So we live in an age now where you kind of have to be a little bit of your own marketing department.
Well, this has been fascinating to me. I know I've scribbled a whole bunch of notes down while we were speaking.
Well, I will mention one more thing. It's funny you mentioned this because starting next week, and this is a little bit of self-promotion, so you'll have to forgive me, but starting next week on the podcast, I'm actually launching a whole new mini series where I'm going to be interviewing fellow authors that I've connected with on Twitter.
Oh, great.
From different genres, backgrounds, self-published, traditionally published. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm going to be doing a series that's going to start next week and run all the way through into the spring, interviewing authors from different backgrounds.
So can I pitch you some of my authors to interview?
Yeah, absolutely. We could certainly talk offline about that.
I'm just kidding. But anyway, if there's anything else, John, I want to make sure that you had a chance to cover everything you wanted. I know there's a bunch of people that want to ask questions, so I want to leave a little time before we end, so everyone can ask. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before?
I will say, if you're getting started on Poshmark, focus on two things. Number one, spend some time on your branding. I see a lot of Poshmark users. You've got a lot of opportunities. Focus on, and I'm just going to use this as a demo. Focus on your layout photo. We used a panoramic shot of the store for the background photo. Create an avatar. For most people, it's going to be your face, or it can be your store logo. Put some time into the branding to make a really strong first impression. And I will say the key to success on Poshmark is just be responsive. People are going to engage. They're going to ask questions, answer those questions. When someone orders something, whether it's a big item or a small item, send it out right away. The better experience you provide to your customers, the more you're going to have traction, the more you're going to gain traction, the more you're going to have repeat customers. And it really does come down to that tried and true, provide great service. We try to replicate as much as possible that in-person experience online that we do in store.
And wait, there was two things you said: spend time on branding, and then was it
great customer service? Just be responsive. Even if you feel like you're answering the same question 10 times, answer it 10 times. Even if you've already provided the answer that question. Sometimes it can really make the difference between someone who's just on the fence and someone who's actually going to, put a bid or buy that item.
That's both great pieces of advice. And I'm curious, when you have the app, can you set the app, let's say that people are asking questions, to send a little alert to your phone so that if you're busy working while you're beep, and you go and
you get an alert. And here's my advice for someone who's busy.
Yeah.
Put on your notes app basically like a copy and paste, where it's a message where you can say, thank you for your question. I'm going to answer it by the end of the day. So if you can't answer it right away, you at least have an immediate response, or put an FAQ up on your store that all questions will be answered at a certain time. So you can actually tailor your Poshmark business to your busy schedule. And I talk about this in the book. So you may not have time to be immediately responsive, but that doesn't mean that you can't provide a great response and do so on a timetable that works for you.
That is an excellent customer service piece of advice. I could use that myself with my business. Well, I just want to thank you so much, John, for being here today. And thank you to everybody who is listening and watching. And I know I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Jamie, and she's going to run the Q&A section of this panel for us.
Yeah, great. So I just want to say, I saw a question about how to start a podcast, which is an entirely separate webinar.
I will answer this. I have an entire mini series on my website on how to start a podcast. So if that's something you're curious about, check it out. I break down all the steps on starting a podcast.
Awesome. And I'm going to throw in here in the chat, and I encourage you all to go to the Johns Hopkins Alumni Association YouTube page, where we have a variety of websites, one of which is how to start a podcast. So two great resources I encourage you to use. And I also encourage you to go to our website, because you'll see a lot of other really interesting webinars. So let me see, we have some questions. So one of our attendees says that she sees that people follow her every day. Is there an easy way to follow back besides one-to-one?
I recommend, for us, we don't always have time to follow back. So we just set aside some time to see who's following us. And I will give you a tip. The best people to follow on Poshmark, focus on the people who just got onto Poshmark and are following you. They may have only 2 or 3 followers. If you're selling on Poshmark, those are most likely going to be your target market. The people who just got on and are not selling, but looking to buy. That I would say is more high priority than following back someone who is also a seller and maybe has 20,000 followers. Do so. Obviously, if they're following you, it's always nice to follow them back. Put your targeted time on those new Poshmark users. Those are the people who are most likely going to be buying from you.
Great. That's great advice. We have another question from a guest. You said that the key to success for Poshmark is about haggling and learning the language. What kind of other research do you think new sellers should do to get ready to start on the platform?
That's a great question. Here's what I recommend you do is spend some time on the platform. Look at what other Poshmark sellers are doing. See what their photos look like. See what kind of copy they have. More importantly, I would say also, because every listing has a chat feature, see how they're engaging with their followers and their potential customers. You can learn so much just by being on the app. And again, it's a very robust community. We've been able to connect with different Poshmark users, including customers who have been repeat customers. You'll learn so much just by engaging with them. And you're going to find once you set up your store, you're going to have people leaving welcome messages. Those are people that you might want to connect with. You can learn from them. And it's a pretty robust community. There are also many resources online, not just what I've put out there. You can find tons of resources online, forums, Facebook pages, Facebook groups, Twitter chats. There's tons of resources out there.
That's great. I mean, you're a wealth of information and the expert in all of this. So it's been really nice to have you available to us. I always recommend Google as the first go-to. If you have a question, I just Google the question right in there and usually it comes up or shows me how to get the information I need. And I think just messing around with the website, that's the best way to learn. You
can start as a lurker. You can start and here's the thing. A lot of Poshmark sellers are buyers too. Many people come to Poshmark because they're looking for a very specific item or they want to see. It's become a go-to place for a lot of people who are looking for that special, wardrobe for that particular occasion, or they just want to supplement and it's time to update the wardrobe. So you can start as a browser, you can start as a lurker, and there's so much you can explore before you actually start selling. But, there are many ways to go about it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Last call for questions. I did write in the chat, I put a lot of information in there. Your article, which was really cool, your blog or your website, Be Moving Forward.
Mm-hmm.
And, I will send an email to everybody on this call with a lot of resources. Our event website where you can find more content to watch. And if you have any questions or ideas for future programs, reach out to me. You're going to have my email and we would love to do more of these. We want your ideas because we want to know what you want. So with that, thank you so much for your time. This was so great. Like, I feel like I want to go shopping now so I can just sell it all.
I'm going to go sell everything in my closet right now.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's a wonderful tool. It's a tool like any other. We've definitely utilized it and it's up to you. You can start out just by browsing. You can be a buyer, you can be a seller, or you can do both. And again, I think I'm proof positive if I can do it, almost anyone can, because I am by no means an expert on clothes. That's my dad. I'm just, someone who just learned and really just crash course in all of this stuff.
Oh, I do have one more question. It's actually a really good one. You do so many different things, which is true. You're a man of many talents. What's been your most rewarding venture?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I would put this up there, being able to work with my dad, because he's been in this industry for decades and it's not an industry I'm familiar with. Obviously I've benefited from the, what he's been able to provide in terms of for the family and everything. But over the last couple of years, just getting a better appreciation for what he does and how good he is at it. And being able to take some of that and introduce the technology so that he can grow his business. One of the biggest gifts I think I've seen is, I'll share two. Number one, being able to expand his business beyond his zip code. We have customers now all over the country, California, Texas, the Dakotas. We've sold to places that I never imagined possible. The other thing we've been able to do, which I never anticipated this would be an effect of being on Poshmark, is we've been able to, and this is going to sound very counterintuitive, we've been able to drive in-person traffic to his store. Just last week, we had a customer who found a wedding gown that we had listed. We listed it well over a year ago. And she said, I've been looking for this wedding gown everywhere and I can't find it. I'm in Maryland. Can I make an appointment to stop in? She not only stopped in, she bought the dress, and her mother came, and her mother bought a dress as well for the wedding. This is what my dad calls, he came up with this term, reverse advertising. It's basically Poshmark has been able to work both ways, not only increase online sales, but to drive in-person traffic and awareness. We've had customers come from as far as Pennsylvania and Virginia who have discovered us on Poshmark, who have opted to come in to make an appointment to try on the clothes. So that's been an incredible benefit just to see that. That's something I never anticipated.
That's so cool. And sidebar, John's dad's store is is where I grew up, and not far from where I live now. So it's very exciting and great for the community to have it there. So we all appreciate the fact that your dad is there.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to go down when I'm at homecoming. Maybe I can go get down.
Absolutely, stop in. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that has been probably one of the most satisfying things. Jamie, in answer to your question, I really enjoyed my time as an actor. It was a sideways journey, and it's something that I'm excited to share one day, in a fuller, longer form book, maybe a different talk about that. But that was probably one of the most rewarding experiences of my life as well. Just getting exposed to the entertainment industry and connecting with so many amazing people there. So, those are two I would say up there. Of course, I also, and I'll just say this, I enjoyed my time at Hopkins. Hopkins, for me, the MBA program is where I was able to take all these different experiences and really kind of hone them together and utilize all these different skill sets and experiences that I've gained over the years, whether it's practicing law, whether it's acting, or in this case, sales. Just seeing the convergence of all of that and being able to share that with different people has been very rewarding. And today.
Awesome. Well, we're so happy to have you. If you hear some barking, don't worry. I'm sure it's the mailman or a package being delivered. Oh,
I see him.
Just a dog wanting to.
You just heard about the pet goods that are available on Poshmark, I think.
He was like, he's ready. Are you ready? All right. Well, it was so nice to see everyone. And thank you so much. We hope you have a safe, happy weekend, and we hope we see you soon. So thanks again. Thank you for your time and talent.
Jamie and
Thank you, Elena.
I just want to say thank you both so much for having me. And I want to thank everyone who attended today for all the great questions. I hope, my goal is always threefold. It's either to inform, educate, or entertain. Hopefully I've done a little bit of each, but that's my goal with any presentation or content that I share.
Well, you definitely succeeded. It was a terrific speaking with you, John. Thank you so much.